The story is told from a girl's perspective. All right, sweetheart, I'm off, he said, throwing a backpack over his shoulder. He kissed me and opened the front door. Got everything? Yeah, I think so, my husband said, patting his pockets. Be careful out there, okay? It's the middle of nowhere, you know. Who knows what's out there? It's been how many years since you last went? I said. That's a tough question, he smiled. Probably 2 years, I guess. Do you think the house is still standing? Where else would it be? He laughed again. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's been torn apart by squatters or looters, I joked. Come on, 3 people live there and they can barely walk. Nobody's gonna bother with it. All right, just stay in touch, okay? I can't promise that, he said. You know how it is out there. No signal in most places. Well, at least check in every couple of hours. You got that? I demanded, trying to sound stern. Okay, I will, he chuckled. All right, I gotta go or I'll miss the train. He kissed me one last time, shut the door, and ran down to the taxi waiting outside. My husband was heading to his parents' old house in the middle of nowhere, a place that had been empty for nearly 2 years. Miraculously, we'd recently found buyers for the property. I couldn't understand why anyone would want an old house in a half-abandoned village, but from the phone call I had with them, it seemed like they were elderly folks just looking for a quiet spot to live out their days. We had listed the house for sale at a ridiculously low price, and after almost 2 years, we finally found someone willing to buy it. The house itself was small but cozy, sitting at the edge of a village surrounded by dense pine forests. If I had my way, I would have packed up and moved there with my husband, but it was too far from the nearest town. You had to take a train or drive for quite a while, and we didn't have a car. The trains barely ran, and there were always problems with electricity. I remember when we visited his parents, we'd often use candles or kerosene lamps because the power went out so often. Even when Oleg, my husband, brought them fancy battery-powered lamps, they never even opened the boxes. Phones? Forget it. They didn't even know how to use them. His parents were simple people who had lived their whole lives far from the city and modern technology, and they lived a long, happy life together. They even passed away, just days apart. First, Oleg's mom died, and then his dad. He couldn't bear the grief. It happened sometimes, so Oleg had gone back to the house to tidy things up and get it ready for the sale. There were probably a lot of repairs needed after 2 years. I wanted to go with him, but our schedules didn't match, and I couldn't get time off work. Plus, I wasn't too keen on staying in the middle of the woods for a couple of days, and I think he was fine with the idea of getting some time away from me too. But as soon as he walked out of the door, I had this weird feeling like I was already missing him. Even though I saw him every day, something felt off. It was strange. He'd been away for longer before, back when his parents were still alive, and I never felt like this. I had no idea that morning would be the last time I'd see him alive. After Oleg left, I got ready and went to work. It was early, cold, and miserable outside. Winter was coming. I couldn't stop worrying about how he'd manage in such cold weather. Would he get sick? I pulled my phone from my bag and called him. "Hey, babe," he answered, his voice warm. "How are you?" "You staying warm?" I asked, concerned. "Yeah, I'm fine. I've got a sweater and everything." "Good, don't go catching a cold or I'll have to run to the pharmacy for meds." "Don't worry, the train's pulling up. I gotta go. I'll call you when I get there, okay? Hopefully the signal works." "All right, don't forget," I said, but the line went dead before I could finish. My workday started off terribly. I spilled coffee on important papers, snagged my stockings on a nail sticking out of my chair, and everything just seemed to go wrong. It felt like the universe was telling me I should have called out sick and gone with him. Little mishaps followed me all day long. During my breaks, I'd call Oleg, and hearing his voice was the only thing that calmed me down. We didn't talk long because he was busy trying to get everything done and the signal was terrible. When I got home that evening, the first alarm bell rang. I couldn't get a hold of him. I don't even know how many times I tried calling, but there was no answer. Sure, there wasn't always a signal out there, and he'd warned me, but something didn't feel right. He said he'd call me before bed, and now it was almost midnight. Maybe he's just tired and passed out, I told myself, trying to calm down. But my mind kept spinning with worry. That was the last time I heard from him. The next day, I woke up and tried calling again. This time I heard the ringing, but no one answered. The entire day, I was on edge, trying to call him over and over, but nothing. My anxiety kept building until I couldn't take it anymore. I lied to my boss, saying I wasn't feeling well and left work early. To be honest, I really wasn't feeling well. The stress was eating me alive. When I got home, I remembered that Oleg's phone was linked to the locator on my iPhone. I don't know how it works on Android, but I could see his phone's location on mine. I checked, and it showed he was still in the village, but not at his parents' house. His phone was at another house entirely. What the hell is he doing there? I thought. Maybe he was helping someone out. He was always generous like that. I called again and again, but no answer. I was losing my mind. Sitting in the kitchen, staring at my phone, I realized I had no other option but to go there myself. The next train wasn't until the morning, so I tried to book a taxi, but no one wanted to take the job, no matter how much I offered. Hours passed with no luck. Everything seemed to be working against me. I spent the whole night wide awake, watching the locator and trying to call Oleg. His phone stayed in that same house the whole night. He couldn't have stayed there all night, could he? Maybe there really was a problem with the signal. I was trying to calm myself down, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. As soon as dawn broke, I packed up and headed to the train station. The trip took about an hour and a half. The rhythmic clattering of the train lulled me into a light sleep. I'd barely slept the night before, so I dozed off against the window, only waking when the train started to slow down. The landscape outside was nothing but endless forests and fields, no sign of life anywhere. When the train finally stopped at the small, dilapidated station, I was the only one who got off. The train stayed for barely 2 minutes before disappearing, leaving me standing alone at the rusty platform. As I looked around, I noticed how much worse everything had gotten since the last time I was there. The state had long given up on this place, but the locals had always tried to keep things in order. The station used to be clean and well maintained, but now it looked desolate and grim. The air was damp, and the ground had turned into a muddy mess from the rain. I pulled out my phone to check for signal. Nothing. Not a single bar. I started wondering if I'd made a mistake by coming. Maybe we'd just missed each other. Maybe he had already left. That thought didn't cross my mind until I was already there. It wasn't a long walk from the station to his parents' house, about 10 minutes. As I trudged through the muddy field, the village came into view. The place was a ghost town. Most of the houses had collapsed into piles of rotting wood and moss-covered shingles, but Oleg's parents' house was brick, and surprisingly, it still stood. The only sign of neglect was the overgrown yard. I ran to the house, hoping Oleg would be there, but my worst fear came true. The house was empty. My legs buckled and my heart raced as I scanned the room, hoping maybe he'd just stepped out. But when I saw his belongings scattered around, his torn jacket, his boots, one in the hallway, the other outside, I knew something was wrong. And the door had been open when I arrived. Tears streamed down my face as I realized something terrible had happened. But there was still a glimmer of hope. I wiped my eyes, pulled myself together, and began searching for him. The sky had grown dark and cold raindrops began to fall. I walked through the abandoned village, calling out his name, but there was no sign of him, no clue as to where he could be. Desperation set in, and a sinking feeling in my gut told me that I might never see him again. Exhausted, I returned to the house and realized I would have to spend the night there. The trains wouldn't run again until morning. A wave of hopelessness washed over me as I came to terms with the fact that I was stranded. In a foolish attempt to get a signal, I found an old ladder in the shed and climbed onto the roof. Maybe I'd be able to call for help, but the ladder wasn't stable, and just as I reached the top, it gave way beneath me. I didn't even have time to react as I crashed to the ground. The fall wasn't far, but I had hurt my leg. When I looked down, I saw a large wooden splinter sticking out from below my knee. The pain was excruciating. Rainwater washed the blood down my leg, and I cursed myself for ever putting that house up for sale. Moving my leg was impossible. I tried to get up, but the pain was too much. That's when I heard a voice. "Careful there. Need some help?" Startled, I looked around, thinking I had hit my head in the fall and was hallucinating. But no, there was a large, hulking figure standing behind the fence. He was dressed in old, dirty clothes and looked like he hadn't bathed in years. He couldn't have been more than 40 or 45, but his face was worn and rough. "I could use some help," I muttered, forcing a smile through the pain. The man opened the gate and approached me. "You need to clean that wound before it gets infected. Come on, I'll help you," he said. "Really?" I was surprised by his kindness. "Yeah, of course. People should help each other out," he said, lifting me off the ground. "Just don't put any weight on that leg." As he helped me limp to his house, I asked, "Who are you?" "I thought this place was abandoned." "You're right, for the most part. I live here alone," he replied. When we reached his house, I couldn't help but notice the stench. It was filthy, and the man himself smelled even worse. Still, he seemed friendly enough. His house was just as unpleasant as he was, smelly and dirty, but it was relatively orderly. "I'm looking for my husband," I said, sitting down on a chair. "He came here 2 days ago, and I haven't been able to reach him. His things were scattered all over the place, and he's nowhere to be found." "Have you seen him?" "He's tall, has a thick beard. Here, let me show you a picture." I reached for my phone, but realized I must have dropped it during the fall. "Don't worry, I'll get your wound cleaned up, and then we'll go look for your phone," he said, grabbing some supplies. "You know, I don't go out much," he continued. "I usually head in the other direction toward the pond or the forest to hunt and fish. I haven't noticed anyone around here." "Yeah, this place is huge," I said. "Don't worry, we'll find him," he reassured me as he started cleaning my wound. When he pulled the splinter out, the pain was unbearable, but thankfully it didn't last long. He cleaned the wound with what I think was peroxide and wrapped it up with some old bandages that looked like they were from the Soviet era. "That's the best I can do," he said, standing up. "Thank you so much," I said. "I didn't even catch your name." "Matvey," he said with a smile and walked out of the house. "You should lie down, rest. I'll go look for your phone, and maybe your husband too," he said with a grin before closing the door behind him. As soon as he left, something felt off about his eagerness to help. But then again, maybe he was just lonely, living all by himself in this forgotten place. I looked around his house, and the first thing that caught my eye was a rifle in the corner. Hunting and fishing, that makes sense, I thought. You have to survive somehow out here. But something didn't sit right with me. As I looked around more carefully, I noticed something familiar on one of the shelves. My husband's watch. The one I'd given him last year for his birthday. A wave of terror washed over me. He lied. He'd seen Oleg. He'd done something to him. My husband never took that watch off. I felt dizzy, and everything started to spin as I collapsed to the floor. The last thing I saw before passing out was Matvey's grotesque figure standing in the doorway, grinning from ear to ear. I drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes feeling him drag me somewhere, doing something to my arms. When I finally woke up, I was in a different room, lying on a bed with my hands tied. Matvey was sitting at a table, eating something. "Oh, you're awake," he said with a sick grin. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" I screamed, though deep down I already knew the answer. He got up, walked over, and dropped something in front of my face, the severed head of my husband. I screamed with all the strength I had left. The horror, the shock, I can't even describe it. He just laughed. "It's a little tough, but edible." My stomach turned. He was eating my husband. The realization hit me like a truck. I was trapped with a monster. I cried uncontrollably, screaming as loud as I could, but it was no use. He took his time, chewing on what was left of Oleg, laughing at my screams. "Yell all you want. I like it," he said. Then things got even worse. He walked over to me, pulling down my pants. "Never seen one in real life," he mumbled, picking a piece of human flesh from between his rotting teeth. He started touching me everywhere with his disgusting hands. I tried to fight back, but I was no match for him, especially with my injured leg. He tried to rape me, but his massive gut got in the way. I was defenseless, and he could do whatever he wanted to me. When he couldn't manage to rape me, he flew into a rage and began hitting me in the face. I was barely able to breathe through the pain, and he was loving every second of it. He didn't let me pass out, forcing me to stay conscious. After tormenting me for what felt like an eternity, he left the room and returned with a pot in his hands. He filled it with some kind of fat and placed it on the stove. "Please just let me go," I sobbed, but he didn't listen. He stood by the stove, humming to himself as the fat melted and began to boil. Without a word, he grabbed the pot and walked over to me, took my hand, and plunged my fingers into the boiling fat. The pain was unimaginable. I blacked out from the shock several times, but each time he slapped me back into consciousness. When the flesh on my hand had melted away, exposing the bones, he started gnawing on them right in front of me. All the while, I was awake. I watched as he ate my fingers, my husband's head lying beside me, his dead eyes staring into mine. When he'd had his fill, Matvey stood up. "All right, time to send you to your husband. I'm sure you miss him," he said, smiling as he left the room. He came back with his rifle, loaded it, and pointed it at me. I started begging for mercy. What else could I do? He was enjoying every second of it, savoring my pleas. As he slowly approached me, I thrashed around on the bed, trying in vain to free myself. In my struggle, Oleg's severed head rolled off the bed and onto the floor. Matvey stepped on it and slipped, falling to the ground. The gun went off with a deafening bang, and I knew exactly what had happened. The fool had blown his own brains out. In that moment, I realized that guardian angels, or whatever higher power is out there, really do exist. I couldn't explain what had just happened, but I was alive. Once I calmed down, I used my foot to grab a knife from the floor, held it in my teeth, and freed myself from the ropes. Then, I got out of that hellhole as fast as I could. I spent the rest of the night at the old abandoned train station, waiting for the first train home. Thank God I made it back alive. My leg healed, but my hand had to be amputated.
If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Together we can take this channel to the next level, and don't forget to check out this video.